Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to a new appointment for the Transnational Girlhoods, Writing Transnational Girlhoods series of seminars. I am Olga Campofreda, Honorary Research Fellow at University College London, and I am so glad to introduce our next talks today. The main topic is going to be shaping the girl self on social media. And to discuss about it, we have Cecilia Brioni and Shauna Pomerantz. So, hi, Cecilia. Welcome.
Hello.
Cecilia is going to be our first speaker. Cecilia Brioni is a teaching fellow in Italian at Trinity College, Dublin. Her research explores the representation of Italian youth in the 20th and 21st centuries in a variety of popular media, including film, television, print media, and social media. Her current research focuses on the self-representation of youth, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality on the video sharing platform YouTube Italia. Her monograph, Fashioning Italian Youth, Young People's Style and Identity in Italian Popular Media, 1958-1975, will be published by Manchester University Press in December 2022. So I am going to leave the mic to Cecilia. You're very welcome to share your PowerPoint, and I will be back soon with my questions and the introduction of our next speaker.
Great. Thank you very much, Olga. Thanks so much for inviting. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. No, this is not where I start. Thanks so much for the invitation. And as I was telling you before, thanks so much for organizing this seminar series, which I've been following, and all the talks have been very inspiring, and the seminar series was really brilliant so far. So looking forward for the next talks as well. But thank you very much for organizing it. I really needed it. It was very refreshing. So thanks for that. My paper today focuses on how girlhood is constructed in social media platforms, and in particular on YouTube, by drawing on my recent IRC postdoctoral research project. Basically, my project has analyzed self-representations of gender, sexuality, and race on YouTube Italia. So I used the Italian beauty and makeup community as a case study to look at how Italian young content creators used this online space to represent their identity. Today, I decided to use a recent initiative promoted by YouTube Italia, YouTubHer, and you can see here the logo, as a case study to discuss how Italian girls represent their gender and professional self in this social media platform. So I will shortly introduce this initiative, but before that, I just wanted to make a few observations about the space where these self-representations take place, namely the digital space of the World Wide Web. So the World Wide Web emerged in the 1990s, and it soon became a place for free expression, given the lack of regulations that this space enjoyed. Especially in these early days, people who could access it explored the liberating possibilities of virtual communities and unregulated self-representations through, for example, webcam and blog cultures. However, as Joyner, Stewart, and Beanie point out, the internet was developed by men and for men, and as such, it replicated stereotypical masculine norms of acceptable behavior, including aggressivity, something that we still today in the ways in which people interact online, and an objectification of women's bodies. In kind of more recent years, technological improvements have allowed internet interfaces to become increasingly user-friendly, so that now digital spaces are accessible for a higher number of people. Moreover, from the mid-2000s in particular, the advent of social media has contributed to what Turner defines the demotic turn, namely the increasing opportunities for ordinary people, including women and young women in particular, to represent themselves in the media. In other words, thanks to the improvement of technologies, the possibilities for free expression allowed by digital spaces are now available to an increasing number of people, regardless of their gender. Now, the empowering role of digital spaces for young women has been underlined by Emma Maguire, who in a recent monograph explores various automedial texts, namely contemporary digital autobiographical texts like camgirling, video blogging, or fangirling, which are produced by young women. These texts, she claims, make visible the textual strategies that girl and young women have employed in order to negotiate the pressures of a media landscape that is often hostile to or suspicious of them. And she emphasizes the agency in play for girls, given the development of Web 2.0 technologies that have facilitated a range of tools, context, and conditions for self-narration. Now, if, as Maguire argues, young women have found new ways to express their self in digital spaces, this does not mean that their self-representations are not subject to forms of commercial and textual mediation. Indeed, as Sarah Bennett-Weiser points out, digital spaces are branded spaces, as they are structured by brand logic and strategies and understood and expressed through the language of branding. Self-representations in digital spaces then should be thought of as self-branding strategies, aiming to offer a rhetorically persuasive version of yourself, to say it with Hearn. This is particularly true for those young entrepreneurs whose job entails creating digital content. The YouTubers, so content creators who produce videos and upload them on the platform, used to be amateurs in the early days of social media, but are now established young professional figures and celebrities who use their creativity, skills, and image to create online content and, of course, sell products as well. So given that they are professionals, their online presence focuses on building and reinforcing their brand, which is their own self in the end. And this is done by triangulating celebrity, commodification, and intimacy. So through their content, YouTubers have to please both the brands they collaborate with, including YouTube itself, and their audience. Moreover, in order to build intimacy with their subscribers, which is a fundamental aspect of YouTube celebrity, they need to offer an authentic image of themselves, which is, as any kind of authentic expressions, in fact, a performance of authenticity. And they have to directly address the audience in their content, as this is fundamental to sort of build a bond with them. Now, discourses around the many different aspects of the job of YouTuber interact in the videos created for the YouTubHer initiative, which was launched by YouTube Southern Europe in 2021. So as part of this initiative, 5 successful Italian female YouTubers were asked to create a video each, which was then uploaded on their respective channels between the 19th and the 20th of October 2021. So just a bit more than a year ago, more or less. The initiative was also discussed in a long interview on the Web News Fan Page's YouTube channel, where the 5 YouTubers were interviewed alongside Francesca Mortari, who's the director of YouTube Southern Europe. And you can see a screenshot of that interview here in the slide. So the YouTubers participating in the initiative are Francesca Presentini from the channel Frafrog, who produces content on drawing and graphic design. Then Fiona Cacalli of the channel Tech Princess, who uploads unboxing videos and reviews of tech products. Then Loretta Grace of the channel Grace on Your Dash, who's a makeup YouTuber. Shanti Vinegar of the channel Shanti Lives, whose channel discusses lifestyle, mental health, and LGBTQ+ themes. And then Sara Bigatti of the channel La Scimmia Yoga, whose contents discuss yoga and well-being. But what's the content of these videos? So in the fan page interview, Francesca Mortari explains that the aim of the initiative is to support young female creators on the platform. Indeed, the brief provided to the creators was to make a video that would inspire the next generation of creators on YouTube in order to tell their stories and create their own community. Sorry, all the translations are by me, so it's my fault if some are not very precise. I'm not a translator. A clear educative kind of function that is to pass on knowledge from more to less experienced young female YouTubers and to attract new creators. In a very practical sense, YouTubHer can also be seen as one of the many initiatives on the part of YouTube to encourage a competitive entrepreneurial desire among the amateur YouTubers, to say it with Jean Burgess. As you know, YouTube videos are often introduced by very annoying advertisements, and Burgess explains that given that advertisers do not want to place a spot alongside poor quality content, YouTube is trying to reduce the ratio of non-monetizable amateur content by inviting amateur creators to become more professional straight from the beginning, basically. But other than as a educative and commercial endeavor, YouTubHer can also be analyzed as an automedial narration, to refer back to what I was saying before about Emma Maguire. Indeed, in their videos, these female YouTubers share the story of how they became YouTubers, the most practical aspects of their profession as content creators, and their ideas on how to be successful on the platform. In other words, they talk about themselves and their experience as entrepreneurs rather than quite simply as girls uploading material on social media, which is the stereotype connected to female online content creators. So this is a very interesting angle from where to look at young women's self-representations, as it puts work and professionalism at the core of the discussion, thus exploring how girls are reclaiming digital spaces and using them to make business. Now, when discussing young women's digital self-representations, a necessary framework to take into account is that of post-feminism, of course. Sarah Bennett-Weiser underlines how there is an intrinsic connection between what she names the post-feminist subject and the interactive subject, namely tech and media-savvy young women. They both realize self-empowerment through their capacity and productivity, and the interactive subject finds a self and broadcasts that self through those spaces that authorize and encourage user creativity. So according to Bennett-Weiser, successful interactive subjects are those who can use digital media to become empowered, and to do so they brand themselves as independent, capable, and productive young women. But the idea that post-feminist ideals are empowering is notably controversial. Many commentators have discussed the many limitations of post-feminism, a concept that emerged in popular culture in the 1990s and boomed thanks to digital culture. So the increasing commercial circulation and trivialization of feminist ideals in contemporary post-feminist discourse is seen as preventing the achievement of real gender equality and as offering a fake idea of emancipation. For instance, Sarah Bennett-Weiser criticizes the individualistic approach to empowerment endorsed by post-feminism, and Diane Nigra claims that post-feminism offers the pleasure and comfort of reclaiming a sort of commercial identity uncomplicated by gender politics, postmodernism, or institutional critique. Moreover, in their discussion of online entrepreneurial femininity, Duffy and Hund demonstrate that women's online activity, which is imbued with post-feminist slogans, often just replicates normative feminine discourses and practices like an interest for fashion and makeup, and as Gens underlines, a performance of authenticity. Now, a similar kind of evaluation has affected representations of female professionalism from the late 1990s. Commenting on how women were represented in television shows like Ally McBeal, for example, Michelle Hammers explains that the body, fashion, and behavioral codes are central in representations of female professionals. And they still tend to emphasize stereotypical feminine qualities and abilities. So now, passing on to YouTubHer, do YouTubers' automedial narrations perpetuate or challenge post-feminist representations of young women's professionalism? Well, many stereotypically post-feminist tropes can be retraced in the YouTubHer videos, and especially in the many kind of suggestions given by YouTubers to the wannabe new female content creators. For instance, Shanti Lives, that you can see here in the screenshot, uses the narrative of individualistic success to explain why it is difficult for women to be accepted by audiences. So she says, female creators have a different experience than our male colleagues on the platform. Often people do not like seeing women who show themselves or who show off and who succeed. Similarly, Lashimya Yoga underlines how ideas around female empowerment are now very popular and should be exploited to reach women's objectives. She says, we will have to break down some walls, challenge a few stereotypes, and this makes things even more adventurous, more exciting. And I think the choice of adjectives here is really telling, as it emphasizes the kind of excitement element over the struggle element in this kind of fight. Then ideas of authenticity also emerge in these videos, such as the idea that to be successful, one needs to be herself, so si te stessa, and true to their heart, so autentica, fedele al tuo cuore, al tuo messaggio. However, there are many instances where I think these automedia narrations challenge post-feminist discourse by offering an alternative and subversive representation of young women's digital media professionalism. For instance, accounts of these YouTubers' early days in the platform tend to encourage young women to go beyond female-specific practices, if they wish to do so, of course, and explore their interests regardless of traditional gender roles. Now, this invitation comes particularly from Frafrog and Tech Princess, who's the person here in the screenshot, whose channels revolve around topics generally thought of as male-oriented, like graphic design and video games and technology. The two YouTubers explain how at the beginning it was kind of difficult for them to feel at ease talking about these topics. Frafrog says she felt like she was in a foreign land and a lone voice, while Tech Princess says she felt in the wrong place, because people implied that women would only create content about female-related practices like makeup and fashion. They both encourage their viewers to not feel intimidated by approaching male-dominated fields because it is quality that counts rather than the creator's gender. So Frafrog and Tech Princess here explicitly invite young women to look beyond gender stereotypes, thus counteracting the post-feminist tendency to emphasize women's empowerment uniquely when associated with stereotypically female-oriented fields or practices, like I highlighted before. Moreover, in their videos, creators display their professionalism in terms of competence and tech knowledge by referring to specific features available on YouTube and other web search engines, and to strategies to optimize the process of content creation. Their suggestions then are not limited to slogans celebrating women's success and empowerment. For instance, Lashimya Yoga, that you can see here in the screenshot, talks about the need of having an editorial plan in content creation and claims that she prepares an annual planning of the videos she is going to make. The kind of scenic design of her video also acknowledges her position as not only a yoga teacher, but also as a tech professional, for example, by showing the cameras through which she records herself. Chantilibs also demonstrates her tech competence by talking about a specific YouTube feature, the hide user from channel feature, that she uses to protect herself from haters and cyberbullies. And Tech Princess suggests to produce content according to the SEO, so search engine optimization, which is the process of using keywords or topics that are popular in a specific moment in time in a web engine when creating online content. So to make, let's say, content more viral in a way. So by referring to specific technical aspects connected to content creation and the world of technology, these female creators provide a representation of female entrepreneurship, which is based on hard work and competence, rather than just on visibility and sort of, glamour. And in terms of work, another aspect that is underlined in many of the YouTubHer videos concerns the importance of studying, keeping updated, and continuing to improve. For example, Lashimia Yoga explains that she always tries to do her best, offer to her audience her knowledge, and to be original. And to do so, she needs to perform a constant in-depth study in order to offer then to her subscribers new content. Moreover, Frafrog's video focuses on the importance of studying and copying in the right way. So according to Frafrog, copying does not mean replicating someone else's work, but rather taking inspiration from multiple sources and quoting your inspirations. It's a great video, and if you are teaching Italian, it's very useful to teach your students what plagiarism means in a way. So to explain this kind of concept, she shows how she creates a specific atmosphere in the background of her videos, signaling through signs and handwriting the technical features she uses to obtain it, as you can see here in the screenshot. And she invites followers to get inspiration from her. So the strategy of highlighting the importance of studying and observing others shows that becoming successful is not just about individual aspirations, but rather it requires continuous work and collaborative efforts. So it counteracts the kind of feminist idea of the self-made woman and the individualist kind of reach to success. Now, one last aspect that emerges from the YouTubHer videos and that seems to go beyond the limitations of post-feminist discourse discussed before is the display of these YouTubers' entrepreneurial spirit. The YouTubers involved in the YouTubHer initiative probably knew that their videos would have given them visibility beyond their usual audience and subscribers. And this is why their videos display each of the YouTubers' brand in terms of themes, language used, and former production. So, for example, Shanti Leaves explains that the reason why she opened a YouTube channel was to overcome a sort of difficult moment in her life in which she was struggling with university, had a toxic relationship, and an eating disorder. And in doing so, she demonstrates that she is allowed to discuss these topics because she went through and overcame these kinds of issues. Lashimia Yoga, instead, alongside her very specific comments on how she organizes her job, makes reference to her yoga specialization by sitting on a yoga mat and mentioning the Sanskrit word dharma to discuss one's own path, destiny, therefore referring to her own brand as a yoga YouTuber in the video. Frafrog makes large use of visual props, which display her abilities in data visualization and drawing, and her video is very well structured into sections, and it makes large use of the author's drawings. Tech Princess shows clips from her channel's videos to portray the kind of content she creates on YouTube. And then Grace on Your Dash says that she is not only a makeup YouTuber, but also an actress and a singer, therefore sort of promoting her whole professional persona. She also makes it clear that the focus of her channel is makeup on dark skin and diversity in Italian society. So basically presenting what her channel is about to this kind of new audience out there. All creators play upon the participatory element of the platform. In their YouTubHer videos, they directly address their audience and ask them to watch other videos in their channel and to subscribe, like Brioni does here in the screenshot that you can see in the slide. So in their article on entrepreneurial femininity, Duffy and Hund maintain that these female bloggers usually tend to downplay entrepreneurial aspiration in order to reaffirm the post-feminist ideal of individual success obtained through self-discovery, passion, and instinct. These YouTubers instead demonstrate that they are able to capitalize on a business opportunity like YouTubHer to promote their brand and themselves by using visual and textual strategies. Now, to conclude, what does YouTubHer tell us about Italian girls' performance of self in social media like YouTube? So in her monograph, Emma Maguire underlines that automedial texts tell us about how youthful femininity is positioned in networks of textual production and consumption that are traversed by discourses of gender, youth, and the commoditization of self-presentations. My analysis of the 5 videos created for the YouTubHer initiative shows that youthful femininity in these texts is multifaceted, as it is recounted both through post-feminist tropes and self-branding strategies, and through direct reference to young women's professionalism and competence, thus offering a representation of online female entrepreneurship that is not just based on individualism and commercialization, but also on competence, professionalism, and collaborative effort. My last point kind of opens up a question. Are these representations empowering? So far from being a quality judgment, I agree with Sarah Bannett-Weiser when she claims that online empowerment is defined and circumscribed precisely by the architecture of the internet. And in this context, empowerment may be realized, but it is realized within the context of brand culture, which means that empowering narrations online are necessarily trivialized, perhaps depoliticized, yet they are significant, I believe, as vehicles of awareness raising, specifically because of the space in which they circulate, which allows them to reach a large audience and to visualize alternative examples of girlhood that can be impactful for younger generations and for other girls. So I'm going to leave this question open for discussion maybe later, and I'm going to stop here, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. That was really, really, really revealing, interesting. I learned a lot, and I have already a couple of questions for you, but I'm going to keep them for later, together with those from the audience. So let me introduce our next speaker. Hi, Shauna, welcome.
Hello.
So, Shauna Pomerantz is a professor of child and youth studies at Brock University in Canada. Her research sits at the crossroads of critical sociology and youth cultural studies, with a focus on girlhood, social media, and gender and education. Shauna has written book chapters and articles on girls' cultural practices, identity negotiations, and popular representations, and is author of Girls, Style, and School Identities, Dressing the Part, and co-author of Girl Power, Girls Reinventing Girlhood, and Smart Girls, Success, School, and the Myth of Post-Feminism. Her most recent research, co-authored with her teen daughter, is on TikTok and includes the following book chapters: Watching TikTok, Feeling Feminism, Intergenerational Flows of Feminist Knowledge, and A TikTok Assemblage, Girlhood, Radical Media Engagement, and Parent-Child Generativity. Shauna's next project is an effective exploration of time, memory, and girlhood through Polaroid images from her childhood, which she will be presenting from today. So the stage is yours, Shauna.
Thank you so much. I'll just share, and everything looks okay, yes? Great.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, I just want to say how wonderful it was to hear the paper on YouTube by Cecilia, and I want to say Cecilia, but Cecilia is a much more beautiful pronunciation of the name. And just so much of my work on TikTok connects, so I have lots of comments and thoughts to bring forward during the discussion. But for now, I just want to say how happy I am to be part of this very cool symposium. My thanks to Olga and Federica for this invitation, and I'm delighted to be here today in conversation with you all. So this talk materializes around encounters with girlhood through Polaroid images taken of me in my bedroom when I was 10 years old, and I'll show you some larger versions as we go along. The Polaroids are part of a network of contingently bound relations, or what French philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari call an assemblage. Some of you may be familiar with Deleuze and Guattari's immanent philosophy, and I'll explain some of it as I go along. So this assemblage that I'm speaking about today includes many, many things, but just for starters, the Polaroid photographs and their glossy coating and white borders, me as an adult woman looking at the images and reimagining what girlhood might mean. But also 10-year-old Shauna, who stares out at me from the Polaroids with her long bangs and her toothy grin. My childhood bedroom and its contents will feature, and also age-based boundaries produced by developmental psychology will form part of my critique. I'll speak a little bit about girlhood studies literature, and of course the immanent ontology of Deleuze and Guattari, as well as Henri Bergson's theory of duration, which I'll explain later. And these things inform my thinking and feeling about girlhood, affect, and temporality. As these interconnected elements converge around the nodal points of the Polaroids, possibilities for girlhood differently emerge, and that's what I want to talk about today. As a result, girlhood is not theorized in this paper in a traditional fashion. It's not going to be a who or a what or a when. And I know this is how I've typically talked about girlhood in the past and how most people speak about it. So I want to offer just a new perspective. The who or what or when assumes a static temporality and also a representational construct that is dependent on opposition to later life stages such as womanhood and adulthood. So I'll theorize this as being caught in a trap of linear temporality, creating a kind of binary thinking between girlhood, womanhood, and girlhood, adulthood, childhood, adulthood, these things leading to separation between life stages and can diminish the potential of girlhood as what I'm calling, after many other people in girlhood studies have done so as well, an ongoing event. So as a developmental life stage, girlhood, a gendered subcategory of childhood, is always configured as the past. We grow out of girlhood. We are encouraged to move forward into an already written future where girlhood is displaced by seemingly more important things like womanhood and adulthood. Instead of continuing in this linear mode, I'm going to ask a different kind of question today. And that question is, how might we feel the effective force of ongoing girlhood through material and temporal relations? And what might this immanent approach have to offer to girlhood studies, or really just to any explorations of girlhood? Flipping through an old photo album found at the back of my closet, I encounter Polaroids taken with my brother's camera. This was a beloved camera that we had back in the 80s. When I draw back the plastic, a sound like masking tape being pulled from the roll fills my adult bedroom, where I sit on the floor with the album cradled in my lap. So I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this. So if you can't hear it, because the speakers in my computer aren't translating well enough, it just sounds like that noise that you can imagine. Perhaps if you're old enough, you can remember that photo albums actually used to look like this with sticky back pages and a plastic coating on top. I remove one of the images from its resting place and feel a surge of intensity run like a current through my body. In my hand, the Polaroid radiates affect generated between it and me in a complex temporal flow. Affect is an embodied sensation that happens before thought, and this is from Brian Masumi, who translates Deleuze and Guattari's work. Its potential lies in the unpredictability of encounter. We don't know what's going to happen when things interact with each other. As Deleuze and Guattari explain in 1,000 Plateaus, quote, we know nothing about a body until we know what it can do, what its effects are, and how they can or cannot enter into composition with other effects. End quote. When bodies, objects, time, and space are drawn together in relational assemblages, such as the one I'm speaking about here around the Polaroids, what might happen? That's the thing that hit me when I opened this photo album. The jolt in my hand as I hold the Polaroid alerts me, and I am now attuned to this happening. It is 1980. The image shows me on my bed in the suburban Toronto home where I lived with my parents, brother, and sister. Beside me sits carefully arranged stuffies, which I played with in the day and relied on to protect me at night. Just out of frame to my right is a clock radio with an AM/FM dial. I'm not sure this exists anymore. I still have a clock radio with an AM/FM dial. I think it is still from the 80s. This now ancient technology brings music into my room and makes me a girl who knows rock and roll. Gloria Gaynor, Billy Joel, Blondie, Joan Jett, Donna Summer, Jackson 5. I could go on and on and on about how important this clock radio was to me. But the reason I mention the objects in my bedroom is because as I look at the Polaroid, the objects engage with each other and with 10-year-old Shauna in the image. And it draws my attention to the continual motion of relations that brings this image to life for me. The motion is not static, it is not still, it's moving and it's affecting, it's alive. The significance of affect, Kathleen Stewart writes, lies, quote, in the intensities they build and in what thoughts and feelings they make possible, end quote. Polaroid possibilities emerge from this assemblage in my encounter with the Polaroids, and I sense a challenge to the static and the stable nature of girlhood's borders. The intensity of these sensations does not jibe with the fixed temporality of a chronological girlhood. Instead, girlhood feels porous, entangled, and utterly present. And I'm honestly so interested to hear if other people feel this way about their own childhoods, girlhoods, etc., and if there is some sense that there is a lingering intensity rather than something we have to separate from. I peel another Polaroid from the sticky page to examine the bulletin board figured here that I carefully curated as a child. I see how it demonstrates my privileged childhood, a girl whose parents can afford to sign her up for camp and swimming, a girl who feels comfortable to participate and achieve, a girl with sleepovers and birthday parties stickered on her Jetsons cartoon calendar. If you don't know the Jetsons, it was a cartoon on in the 70s and the 80s, back when I was young. I'm not sure it's on in reruns anymore, but it was about a space-age family living in the future. The calendar also punctuates the linear passage of time. And as I hold the Polaroid and become hyper-aware of the privilege of my girlhood and my childhood, I also become hyper-aware of how time is really discussed in a linear fashion. The calendar should suggest to me how pages are turned forward, days are crossed off in sequence. However, as I hold the Polaroid and I feel that affective intensity that vibrates between it and me, time no longer feels straight. It no longer feels linear. It zigzags. I am not transported back in time so much as I am participating in a happening that catches me up in its dynamic movement. In other words, the temporalities are converging on each other. Just as the stability of girlhood's borders have become porous, so too have temporal categories of past and present. Monica Swindle, who does research around girlhood and affect, explains that girlhood is, quote, an embodied knowledge, an experience that can be recalled, re-entered, and re-embodied, something that I can feel and experience, a feeling that affects me at a bodily level, end quote. As I attune to these sensations, I also recognize how overlooked they are. We completely ignore these feelings most of the time. And that's because we are schooled out of girlhood into something seemingly more promising. But its force continues to reverberate over our lifelong cartographies. In other words, girlhood resonates constantly if we have lived through a girlhood. Though we may sense girlhood's presence, we are repeatedly required to ignore it, participating in the continuance of a girlhood narrowly defined by static age-based characteristics. The belief that girlhood ends is part of normative development from childhood to adulthood that always moves forward, as I said, in a straight line. As a result, we constantly tell girls, to quote Neil Diamond, and here I'll play you a song.
Girl, you'll be your woman soon.
So that's Uma Thurman from Pulp Fiction, but I don't think it'll break copyright, Olga, because it's a GIF, and it's a very short GIF at that. But that song for me is so resonant of how we talk to girls about their lives. You'll be a woman soon. You will grow up. You will move on. Your girlhood will be a thing of the past. Typical childhood development from infancy to adulthood has been theorized through age and stage-related categories and includes the work of Sigmund Freud, Erik Erikson, Lawrence Kohlberg, and Jean Piaget. Perhaps he's most famously associated with ages and stages. While not all developmental theories are rooted in universalizing phases, and I hate to paint them all with the same brush, but the idea that childhood must be exited is a common feature and solidifies a powerful binary between adulthood and childhood. From this perspective, children are understood always as in process, and I teach childhood studies, and I'm constantly talking about how children are seen as these mini adults who will move on, grow up, they'll get to where they're going. But this is so unfair to the actual state of girlhood and childhood. You know, they're on their way always to becoming fully actualized adults who have finally arrived at their destination instead of being powerful beings in their own right. So this arrival necessitates emotional, physical, and psychological separation from anything resembling childhood, which must be put away like a toy on a shelf. When gender is factored into childhood, other forms of dualistic thinking continue to contribute to boundary making that promote leaving girlhood behind, not just as a completed life stage, and this is the hard part, but as a disparaged subject position, you know, and Cecilia talked a little bit about this, about how girls are disparaged on YouTube, for example. So there's a devaluing of girlhood, and that is, of course, rooted in historical and current forms of sexism and heterosexism, where girls are deemed less interesting and important than boys, men, and even women. Girls are really considered the least interesting, social category in so many contexts. This disparaged intersection of age and gender is, of course, further intensified when a girl is also working class or poor, if she is of color, indigenous, queer, trans, non-binary, and all the various intersections that would create even different and other forms of oppression. Celebrated through post-feminist girl power rhetoric, yet constantly circumscribed by gender-based harassment, sexual violence, moral panic, and heightened surveillance, girlhood continues to be confined to rigid binaries that make it one of the most talked about and delineated social categories in the world. You know, it's no wonder we tell girls that they can be women soon. There's some sense that being a girl is really not a good thing. And in the paper that I'm working on in relation to this topic, I develop that a lot more deeply, where I talk about how girlhood is disparaged in a variety of capacities, but we're all familiar with it. Looking at the Polaroid of my bulletin board, I might be inclined to see it as an example of developmental progress. You know, look how far I've come. That little girl is so young and she knew nothing. And look at me now, I'm so grown up, you know, I hardly recognize her. But that's not what I felt. Instead of feeling separate from 10-year-old Shauna, Polaroid possibilities produced a new sensation, and it was that sensation that caused me to develop this work. I do not feel exterior to the girl in the image or the girlhood she invokes. Instead, I sense myself becoming in relation to them. Not a woman who was a girl not a woman who was a girl or a girl who became a woman, but an overlay where these things, you know, they don't just graft onto each other, but they're interconnected, they're entangled with each other. An immanent approach to girlhood suggests a way of thinking about it as relationally constituted within assemblages, as a happening that shifts as it interacts with other things, people, locations, and of course, temporalities, which is what I'm so interested in right now. An immanent girlhood, I think, as I replace the Polaroid on the sticky page, is a girlhood released from a boundary making imperative that isolates it from the rest of life, that categorizes it, that silos it. A girlhood without defined borders, a girlhood of multiplicities, a girlhood that stays rather than fades away. There I was inclined to use a Neil Young song, "It's Better to Burn Out Than Fade Away," but I thought one piece of music was enough for this particular presentation. Holding the Polaroids, I feel a surge of my girlhood past, yet I am caught up in the sensation that the past is not left behind this moment in time, and it is instead entangled with each new moment that unfolds. So that brings me to Henri Bergson's theory of duration. This is an immanent conceptualization of time, and it helps me think about and feel this tangle of temporality, past and present. For Bergson, duration is embodied time, rather than what Rebecca Coleman describes as, quote, a unidirectional line onto which time is plotted and which precedes and passes externally to our bodily experience of it. In other words, duration is internal time, as opposed to the external time that we're so used to, especially in the global north. Duration, how time is felt as intuitive rather than expansive, is a relational experience that is affected by assemblages of memory and materiality. Neither dormant nor suspended, the past then is conceived as active and surprising. Duration materializes as what Coleman calls, quote, a bodily knowing. We feel it in our bodies. How a past event is felt is always new, she theorizes. It hits us differently as memory mingles with the now. And you can think about this like we say time heals all wounds, but it's because we remember things differently as time moves on. If someone insults us in the past, it might feel very fresh and very strong, and it might burn in our bodies. And then over time, that feeling might shift and change into something else. So this is also the way that duration is talked about. It might hit us differently, that memory, as it mingles with the now, but it is also something that remains. It stays with us and is different from and connected to the past. Past and present are then mutually contingent and inseparable. Or as Deleuze writes, quote, the past is contemporaneous with the present that it has been. I spent a long time thinking about that quote. It's a little bit mind-boggling. In other words, past and present enable each other's existence and affect each other to generate constant change in embodied sensation and perception. And this is what struck me when I held the Polaroids. As both heterogeneous and continuous, the past endures as it participates in an ever-changing present. Duration is thus how the past may be understood as dynamic and creative, rather than something we simply walk away from and leave behind. Duration offers intriguing possibilities for girlhood studies and studies of girlhood. Girlhood studies, if you're not familiar, it's a field that has both resisted and reinforced linear time. It's done both. It has diversified the what and the who a girl can be. Like there's incredible studies out there on age and on gender as a performance and an expansive concept, not limited, of course, to people who were born experiencing girlhood. It also includes expanding and critiquing gender and age-based designations. But it is also predicated on girlhood as a separate and unique experience from womanhood. Girlhood studies really came into existence in the early 90s as a way of separating from women's studies and offering a unique perspective on the lives of girls, which I was a part of and I loved and still love. But it's fair to say that such a dualistic foundation is difficult to surpass without concerted effort and interest in temporality as a complex multiplicity rather than an externalized, taken for granted feature of daily life. Reimagining the flow of time and memory as duration, however, opens exciting questions that participate in transforming girlhood studies and studies of girls from inquiries into a separate life stage to those that explore girlhood as non-representational affect with force in spheres not limited to a constrained girlhood. Just a couple more points to make here. As I feel my own girlhood act upon me, enduring as an embodied sensation, a question emerges. Where, how, and for whom does girlhood affect this now? Such a question, which hits me really like a brick as I'm looking at these Polaroids, it necessitates attention to the particularized complexity of a girlhood that vibrates as it intersects with other material and temporal relations. For me, such possibilities arose through Polaroids, but for others, who knows? Who knows when girlhood will be important to this now, whenever this now is? Who knows when or if it will hit you a certain way? But what I felt and continue to feel is that girlhood is not a static past. It is an effective happening that conditions my present. This tangle of temporality offers different avenues for girlhood studies in which girlhood continues to endure and affect things with which it may not be typically associated. Such a reorientation suggests that girlhood continues to magnify its relevance and significance through its permeation of people, objects, places, temporalities, and so many other things. So this is my last slide. Resisting developmental imperatives to grow up, duration offers ways to think, feel, and live girlhood without defaulting to representational stasis that positions it as either this or that. Girlhood is either this or that. And Swindle notes, when we do that to girls, the only movement that is possible is from one predefined positionality to another, from girl to woman, from child to adult. While age-based categorization rooted in linear time will always be relevant to the studies of girls, of course, I would never do away with that mode of thinking, that linear thinking. Duration expands what it can do by extending its reach. Through this lens, the ongoingness of girlhood permeates more than might have been previously thought, and thus casts light on girls' influence, not just to my becoming in relation to it, but to how families, education, media, professions, disciplines, and other sociocultural phenomena also become in relation to girlhood. And the list would go on and on and on. So this immanent conception of girlhood in time enables resistance to the dualisms, individualism, and judgment that reduces possibility, while simultaneously proclaiming and maintaining the irreducibility of girlhood. As such, girlhood may be experienced by anyone or anything affected by its intensity. And these are the possibilities I felt as I put the Polaroid back on its sticky page. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shauna. Thank you so much. It was really amazing. I really felt the sensation of touching the pages, and even if we couldn't hear the swish, you made it quite clear. Thanks a lot. So, as usual, I'd love to open the space for questions from the audience. So if you have anything to ask to our speakers, you're very welcome to raise up your virtual hand or type your question in the chat. While you are thinking about it, I already see Cecilia has something to ask.
Yeah, no, it's just a very quick question to Shauna. Thank you so much. It was so fascinating, your talk, and also again it brought me back to when we had photo albums with and that sound we couldn't hear it, but I could definitely remember it. It was a nice Madeleine. I'm thinking again. I mean. From what I understood, you have a teenage daughter. So, I mean, thinking about when she will look back at her girlhood with digital photos instead, what do you think it's going to happen then? What's the place of affect for that then?
It's
without that materiality.
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, people keep asking me, why do the Polaroids matter? Like, could it just be any photograph? Could it just be the kind that you went to the local photomat and you paid and then they gave you the photos in the envelope, which I remember, but my daughter has no knowledge of that. Like, it's inconceivable that she would have to actually go somewhere to get her pictures developed. So I don't know what affect it will have, but I really love the idea that she'll be affected differently than me. And I mean, how could she not? Those Polaroids have such significance for me because my childhood took place during a certain era, and because we traded those Polaroids. They were hot commodities. And I see they've made a comeback. There's the new kind of Polaroid cameras that I don't want because they're new. And why would I want that? I would want the one from the 70s and the 80s that I had as a kid. And so I do think that she'll be affected specifically and complexly in ways that I don't understand or won't know. But it will hit her differently, for sure. And I think it will hit everybody differently, whether it be through images or, through YouTube clips. Now there's archives of TikToks, archives of YouTube shorts. There's archives of endless digital media. And so those archives will generate an enormous affect. And I hope I live long enough to see and hear, how it affects other generations.
Let me see if I can spot any hand. Otherwise, I'm going with my questions. So I take advantage of Shauna being already bigger on the screen because I made it so. So Shauna, I have this question for you. I was very fascinated by your description of the teenage room and showing it through the Polaroids that you inserted in your presentation. And I always was interested in teenage rooms, as I told you earlier, in general. And I think of them as identity capsules in a moment in which the individual has the need for stating his or her own self. So, for example, I don't know. We have. I remember my childhood, my childhood room, and I remember that I couldn't stand the wallpaper each time my mom picked it for me, which was extremely pink, very feminine, and I didn't really felt it was. Reflecting my personality. So I used to cover it with posters of punk rock bands since I was 12, 13 years old. And, the wallpaper disappeared under the paper of the posters. Aside this anecdote, I go to the point. Do you think that the need for shaping the teenage self that back in the days was represented by the teenage room's walls has been replaced today by the social media walls, which is the feed, the Facebook wall, the Facebook feed on which teenagers post videos, music, quotes, and so on. Maybe at the very beginning of Facebook, this is how it was, and now we have other social media that are probably more up to date. But yeah, you got the
for sure.
Yeah.
And Cecilia should answer this too, because I think it relates a lot to her talk. For those who might not be familiar, there's a huge body of literature out there around girls' bedrooms. I shouldn't say huge. There's a medium body of literature out there. And people like Angela McRobbie and Mary Celeste Kearney have written about the importance of girls' bedrooms, but they were all writing pre-21st century. I mean, this is like the 80s and no, not the 80s. They're probably writing in the 90s. And when they write, they talk about, and I love this expression you used, Olga, identity castles. Is that yours? Can I use it?
Yeah, it's mine.
Okay, I'll reference it appropriately, but those identity castles were huge for me too. And you can see those. The reason why those images resonate for me is because I had a specific relationship to my bedroom. So I'm not sure that images of my daughter's bedroom, she's 14 now, but I'm not sure if I took pictures of that bedroom that she would have the same connection, which goes to your point. Her identity castle is not in her bedroom. She's got fairy lights and she's got fake plastic plants and all the macrame you could handle. But if I were to say, when you're going to look back on your childhood, what do you think what will resonate for you the most? She's going to say TikToks, 100%. She's going to say, she doesn't do YouTube. My son does that. And I think it's an interesting gender division that Cecilia mentioned. But ultimately, she's going to point to digital media. And so it's this idea where the walls become digitized. And I love the way you framed it. The walls are no longer physical. They're still material. In the sense that we can look at them and we can flip through them and scroll through them, but the walls are no longer, the walls that you can touch in your room. And I think this is a profound shift. My bedroom was my identity castle. I organized my books so carefully. And in my university years, the shot glasses were arranged in a certain order. And in my childhood years, the board games were laid out a certain way. I could tap into that like it was yesterday. But I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear what other people have to say about that. So I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shauna. Maybe Cecilia has something to say as well. I would be very glad.
I'll make a quick comment. Then I think Mona had a question as well. So I'll just close on that, but I just wanted to signal it in case you didn't notice, Olga.
Yes.
That's a very good point you're making. And this idea of like how bedrooms sort of represent ourselves and how maybe digital walls now are representing ourselves. I think there is a fundamental difference, which is that physical rooms are private spaces, while our social media profiles are not. And I think that counts in terms of like, I mean, I see myself as an adult as, thinking twice before, putting something on my social media profiles, because of course I'm very aware of the fact that many people, not just, the people I'm intimate with, which could be, you have your friends in your bedroom when you're younger, can see. So I think that's a big difference, and that, changes things. One could also say, as Shauna was saying, maybe her daughter, we were talking about a lot about your daughter, I'm sorry for her, but maybe her daughter who, makes her room a sort of the ideal background for a TikTok could be something else to discuss now. And the fact that, for example, I watched far too many YouTube videos, and now I know that like the backgrounds used in YouTube videos are all more or less the same, and most of them are, bedrooms. So, how has that idea of the girl's bedroom changed with the advent of social media then, when the private space becomes actually a public space? And I think that is also a very interesting thing in that regards in general.
This is enlightening. You have to write a paper on that. We can actually do it together.
Let's do it, Olga.
Such a good idea. Yes. And thank you so much for your answers. So Mona, please ask your question.
Hi, both of you. Thank you so much for such a great talk. You made me sit and think about my own girlhood and childhood. I was born in 97. So most of my memories that I look back on are Facebook memories. Sometimes you get a notification when it tells you like, oh, 10 years ago you posted this. And that would actually take me back to my childhood. Nothing else will, because I moved a lot as a child. Like every year I was living in a different country. So I couldn't have like some kind of spatial attachment. Like you said, the walls did become digital. I don't know if it was because of the mobility or because maybe I was somehow born digital. I wouldn't say the same would be like, I wouldn't be like the same as someone who's born in 2002, for example, who are definitely born digital, but it really does seem like that for me. And I'm just out here trying to give you some personal reflections as of what I was thinking about through your talks. And I wrote down some things. First of all, we realized that social media was not a concrete way for us to collect our memories in when Vine got cancelled. So Vine is something like TikTok. I used to post a lot of things on Vine, and they all got lost because the application went bankrupt and they had to shut down. And that was, tarnishing for people in my generation, at least, or people who, like, that certain part of my childhood was gone just because an app went bankrupt. So it is scary in one sense, but because it's a collective experience, it still becomes a part of how I remember my girlhood, I think. So yeah, social media, yes, can be digital walls, but they're not reliable. Everything could be wiped out in a second unless you screenshot and save it somewhere. And then who does have all that digital space anymore? The concept of space, even digitally, is not endless. There is some sort of limit. So yeah, thanks a lot for your talk.
Thank you so much, Mona, for your observations. This is so fascinating, and I really start feeling the generational gap. Me being born in 1987 and 10 years, look how how different. I mean, I was struck by your statement. Most of my memories are Facebook memories. This will stay with me for at least 2 weeks or so, because it's like, here, I can't believe it. Like, this is very, very interesting. So I have a question for Cecilia, actually, going back to your talk. So I was wondering, you at some point you said that these YouTubers are very much paying attention to the performance side of their job. At the same time, at the very beginning, you said that YouTube started with the aim of authenticity. So looking to the YouTubers that you analyzed in your presentation and also in your postdoctoral research, to what extent the need for performance can coexist with that of authenticity? And I know this is a very big question, but I hope you already have a couple of ideas on it.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that the idea performance versus authenticity is extremely important when it comes to content creation online, as well as, I mean, especially for people who actually have, you know, a persona, an online persona that is a public persona in the end. When I think about authenticity here, I always think about fabricated authenticity, of course, because nothing is really is authentic in a way. And the book that I quoted quite a lot in my presentation, which is Sarah Bannett-Weiser's Authentic, is amazing in this sense, because she talks a lot about this concept of authenticity and how where does authenticity go in digital spaces. So I definitely recommend it if you're interested. In the case of my case study here, I think what is interesting is that I talked about this, these videos that YouTube asked these YouTubers to create, where there is a sort of, there are different layers there. So you have the person, you have the YouTuber who makes videos for their audience, so performing a persona there. And then you have YouTubers, you have YouTube asking the YouTubers to make videos about the YouTuber persona, okay? What is more authentic? I think that actually in the YouTubHer videos where they talk about their job as YouTubers, they can be seen as more authentic because they actually talk about what they do in their job, while they tend, of course, to sort of downplay their professional side in their videos, because their videos, they just, talk about stuff. While in those videos, I think the very interesting thing is that they explain themselves. So in a way, there is an additional, I don't know, there is more authenticity there to a certain extent rather than in their videos. Still, of course, the personas that they perform online is always a sort of fabricated persona. They carefully choose what they present online, and that is definitely not, I would say, their real self. They don't talk about their private life. Most of them, some do, but I mean, it's all a choice, and it is the result of a selection. What do I show of myself in those? How do I construct my persona? So I mean, authenticity there is always fabricated, I think.
Thank you, Cecilia. It was very, very clear. And before I ask Shauna to ask her question, because I see that you have your virtual hand up, I was just, I love to share with you a thought that I've been having since the last couple of days. I came across this interview to this visual artist called Anna Kam. She was in the 1997 or 1998 one of the first cam girls who recorded her life 24 hours on 7 with the connection as it was, the internet connection as it was in 1997, before the internet 2.0. And I think that was authentic because it was kind of pioneering the idea of reality show or reality performance. I don't know how we want to label it, but I think that authenticity has a lot to do with innocence, which means it has a lot to do with the fact that someone is doing something for the first time without knowing the consequences. So it's a little bit like the Big Brother on the television. It made sense until the protagonist did not know that they were going to become public figures or VIPs, sort of. So you really act as yourself without considering the consequences of your behaviors. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting that yeah, things have changed so far. I was wondering whether authenticity hasn't been lost forever, at least in the internet. But these spaces that you are talking about, these kind of meta-narrative spaces in between the performances, are telling me that probably the space for authenticity on the in the web is the meta-narrative space. So yeah, I would just wanted to share this thought. And Shauna, please.
Yeah, I just make a comment to what you were just saying, Olga. I completely agree with you, and I had the same. I mean, immediately the Big Brother example came to my mind while you were talking, because it's the perfect example about that. I don't know. I mean, I think it's very difficult to think about authenticity, but it's true that there is an increasing let's say, acknowledgement of how it works. It goes hand in hand, I think, as well with the commercialization of the platform and the fact that, I mean, when YouTube was created back in 2005, it was really like, you know, girls taking their webcam and just posting videos of them talking. Now, of course, this kind of content is not interesting for the audience, and mostly this content is not interesting for the people who, you know, pay for having their advertisements on YouTube. YouTube has become a commercial platform. So it has rules now, and people have to sort of endorse these rules in order to, you know, have more followers, all these kinds of things, which was not, I think the aim has changed in a way. At the time, it was more, I mean, at the beginning of the internet, as well as at the beginning of social media, the use of social media was very much that of creating a community of people, of like-minded people. I think about, you know, also all the you know, sort of chat groups that existed right before social media that I used briefly when I was a teenager, no? The kind of, you know, thematic chats where you would go and talk about, I don't know, rock music, these kinds of things, no? Where you would interact with people who were not from your city, but at least that was a space to meet new people. While now, I don't think that like using social media is necessarily for creating a community, but sometimes it's more for like, you know, it has become a very commercial kind of
yeah, so in a way, the community has turned into a wider target, which is the way you also ended your paper by mentioning the branding. You know, even the empowering can be possible, but within a branding. That was very interesting. Thank you, Cecilia. Shauna, please.
Sure. This is such a great conversation. I've already written down ideas for a paper on digital walls that we should talk about at some point. But I want to ask Cecilia about, well, post-feminism. So many things you talked about, I've written about in different contexts. So I wrote about post-feminism in schooling, like a book called Smart Girls. And I did this study with my daughter, who we have to talk about because I studied her. It was so horrible for her, but she did sign a consent, and I did have university approval to do it. She was my co-researcher, really. And so we did this project on TikTok, and stuff that you said resonates for me, but sort of differently. So I'll just say a few points. I asked her about how TikTok was a form of informal education. Like, what do you learn on it? And we talked a lot about feminism, which is one of the things you mentioned, just in the sense that girls are seen as post-feminist mostly when they're on YouTube doing makeup tutorials or things like that. She said that there's a lot of makeup for sure on TikTok, but she has learned about war in Ukraine. She learned about COVID-19. She learned about the presidential campaigns in the US, but she learned about feminism on this social media platform. And, many of my students who are 18, 19, 20 years old, they also say that TikTok is a news source. So I know YouTube and TikTok are different, but they're similar in the sense that people are posting information about, 1,000 million different things. And so I guess my question is, rather than seeing it as post-feminist or feminist, for me, it's always been like a complex amalgam of both of these things. We live in a post-feminist world, but there are incredibly feminist things happening all the time. And, for my daughter, learning about the death of Sarah Everard in the UK after that happened, we wrote a paper on that together because it was such a profound experience for her to see these videos. But in between the swiping of the Sarah Everard videos and the hashtag 97% videos and the hashtag, about violence against women videos, there are the makeup tutorials, and there are the, this is how you get a guy, and this is how you do your eyebrows. I guess it's just, is it worth even talking about feminist and post-feminist online spaces? Or are we now in a place where we're talking about both of these things all the time at the same time?
Thank you, Shauna. That's a very important comment that you made. And that's exactly what I do. I mean, I started studying YouTube, and I chose specifically makeup and beauty channels because I wanted to sort of contrast this idea that, people who make makeup tutorials only talk about makeup. As you can see, I didn't really learn how to paint my face while doing my research. So, that's not why I watched them. And that's the point of my paper as well, I think. I mean, I do see what you see. I think that there is value in every single kind of material that is there, even if it just sort of raises awareness about themes and about topics. And I think that that's what most YouTubers do. I mean, I focused on the Italian context, and for example, a very good example of, how the makeup community, the Italian makeup community is relevant is Grace on Your Dash, which I briefly talked about today. And she's a second generation Italian who talks about makeup on black, dark skin. This is because up until 5-10 years ago, there weren't any products for dark skinned people in Italy, just because the connection Italianness, blackness was never made in Italy, While now, even talking about these little things shows that, I mean, there can be, they exist, Black Italians exist, and they have the same right as other people to, find makeup in shops, for example. This talks about, of course, questions of inclusivity, which are very important. And I see that in makeup tutorials for, in YouTube, on YouTube. So I completely agree with you. I think it's important to recognize, though, that post-feminism as a concept, as an ideal, has its own limits. I don't necessarily agree with the fact that we live in a post-feminist world, because I think that feminism is still important and we still need it. While, what I read about post-feminism is sometimes their feminist conquests are taken for granted, and we think that we sort of moved forward from that, and we can sort of relax now. While I do believe that, it's still important to kind of fight our fights. I don't know if it's clear. But...
No, totally clear. And I want to actually thank you, because I also don't think we live in a post-feminist world. I think it's what people think. I think it's what some people think, right? The media has gone through a post-feminist era, and now we've come out another side where now there's actually feminist collectives on my Netflix shows. Like, I'm rewatching Gilmore Girls from the early 2000s. This is a very post-feminist show where everyone's got rights and freedoms. No one talks about anything to do with anything. Everyone's just, got the right to do what they want. But now if you watch a Netflix series, you're going to find discussions of feminism. And I do think there's been a massive shift as a result of social media, because on social media, you have such discussions of feminism bubbling up around violence against women. In Canada, we talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We talk about Black Lives Matter just the same as people do across the globe. And so all of these political things have bubbled up so fast and so powerfully, whether it be YouTube, TikTok, or Instagram, what other platforms young people are using. Snapchat is a different concept altogether, so I won't mention it. But what I want to say is that I think we live in a world that is both feminist and post-feminist at the same time, and that people are constantly negotiating and really fighting battles daily around rights for girls and women and rights relating to feminism. So I agree completely. But it is interesting, to keep it in the framework that there's that complex interplay between feminism and post-feminism all the time online.
Post-feminism.
Post, yeah. I think Rosalind Gill wrote a paper like that, post, like there's some writing out there about that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Shauna. Our time is almost up, so there is maybe time for another question or a comment. Even if you want to tell your position without necessarily ask a question, but just a comment on the topic that we covered today. I'm very happy to invite you to join the conversation. Otherwise, I would start leading toward the end of what has been a brilliant event. So I really have to say, Cecilia and Shauna, I enjoyed so much the conversation. It was so inspiring, and I am sure that it gave everyone a lot of food for thoughts.
Yeah, Olga, thanks for the discussion. Both Shauna and Olga, thank you so much, and Mona who participated, and everyone who participated. But it was a great discussion. So thank you.
It was really fun. Thank you so much. I'll see you all at the next one for sure.
Yes, and I remember. Let me remind you that the next one is on the 21st of November. So please go and check on the ILK's page. This is Writing Transnational Girlhoods Across Literature, Media and Society. Stay with us, and let me also invite you to the final roundtable that is going to take place on the 5th of December, during which we're going to wrap up what we have discussed over the last weeks of talks. So thank you very much for being with us, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Goodbye.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.